So there will be a little bit of paperwork to go through and to find. That's why I'm giving you the outline first. If you don't have any of those handouts, they are on the back table next to where Sela is sitting there. So you can find handout 13, which you'll need first, and Daniel's 70 weeks, which you'll need second, and then handout number 12 should also be back there for you to be able to follow along with. So in handout 13, we've been taking a pause in our flow of things in Revelation to specifically look at the rapture and the timing thereof in conjunction with the 7 trumpets. So again, if you're new to this study, the framework out of which I'm teaching this, what I believe to be what Scripture teaches, is that the rapture takes place at the 7th trumpet. In context of those 7 trumpets in Revelation. And we've been working our way through that, looking at all of the different scripture passages. You have hopefully noticed in this handout that I've given you that there are numerous passages of scripture that give insight into the flow of Revelation. And that's why I've tried to list them as extensively as I was able to in this particular handout. So keep this as a resource. You'll be able to refer back to it. Oftentimes our mind goes very quickly to the New Testament passages. We all kind of have an idea of what Matthew 24 is about. We're getting a picture of Revelation, and then we know some verses here and there in Paul's epistles. But very rarely does our mind go to Old Testament scripture passages that deal with the end time stuff. So that's what I've been trying to teach you, is that the Old Testament is the course book. Like if you're in school, you have the course book that teaches you the subject material, and then you have the answer key that gives you the answers to the test questions. Well, the answer key is the New Testament, right? The course book is the Old Testament. So we need to understand it in context with each other and cross-referencing. You'll hear me say this over and over again, because it is so true. Scripture interprets Scripture. Right? If you don't understand something in one passage, I can guarantee you'll find the answer in another passage. So just make sure that you are creating a habit of doing that. So the place we are at in your handout number 13 is on page 7. And we have looked at this section with points A and point B, and we are starting with point C. This is in context of looking at what's the reason for these additional 30 days, and then there's an additional 45 days. So we've kind of wrapped our head around this whole 3.5 year idea, the 1,260 days, or the months that are listed. So it tells us in different terminology the same number, the 1,260. But in Daniel chapter 12, we've encountered this additional month. You can call it Daniel's 43rd month, and you'll see that on your Daniel 70 weeks handout when we get to that. But here, what is happening in this time frame, after the 1,260 days are accomplished, the 3.5 years, which is the second 3.5 years out of the 7 years, that's when the 7th trumpet is blown, and the rapture takes place, and there's this procession of Jesus that takes these 30 days. It's his second coming procession. We've looked at these different passages of Scripture that teach how he comes up through Edom and marches into the Promised Land to end up at the Mount of Olives, as it is prophesied in Zechariah. So in paragraph C here on page 7 in your handout, it says, Jesus will remove evil leaders and replace them with the saints who reign with him. This is a great promise that we have in Scripture. In Daniel 7:27, it says, Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So we're meant to understand here, it is his kingdom but he is allowing us to rule and reign with him. So it belongs to him. He is handing off some responsibility to his saints that will in turn be dispersed throughout the earth. Remember, we've talked about this before. Jesus is using human processes to rule the earth. And the whole purpose of the 1,000-year reign is because he's using human processes to prepare the earth for the presence of the Father to reside with mankind for all eternity. The new heaven and the new earth that is prophesied in Scripture. So we'll look at those scriptures when we get to those portions. You've seen some of them already in recent months. So the first thing here, first point, the 1,290 days, so that's different from the 1,260 because there's this 30-day period where we're told in Daniel, we're told that the abomination of desolation, this image that is in the temple, the Antichrist worship, is actually allowed to continue for an extra 30 days after the saints have been raptured. So for 30 days there is still this Antichrist worship system in place. So that's 1,290 days is where that ends. And this time period, these last 30 days, seem to be focused on judging the Antichrist and those associated with him. What's happening in this time period, parallel to the saints being raptured in this procession of Jesus, is the bowls of wrath are being poured out. The 7 bowls of wrath. Remember, the time frame, a bowl is poured out very quickly. So this is what is taking place here during these 30 days leading up to the complete overthrow of the Antichrist and his dominions. And then there's this additional 45 days where it seems to be, and again, Scripture does not give a lot of insight into it, so the reason that I'm mentioning it here is simply to try to help answer some questions. There's some logical things that we can think through, but there's not a lot of information that is given to us in Scripture about this extra 45 days. So the 1,335 days, which is that 45 days extra, they seem to be focused on rescuing those new believers who resist the Antichrist. See, what you have to understand, when the Lord is using human processes, there is time involved, right? It takes time to get to places. It takes time to do the work that needs to be done. You can kind of think of this in context of the Second World War, and it's good to kind of parallel some things there because it's more recent in our history, and we have documented videos, and we have pictures, and so it's something we can visualize. The Second World War, when the Nazis were defeated, and then the Japanese were defeated, it still took time to release the captives after the defeat was sure. Right? I tried to research how long it took, and it was different with each concentration camp. Each camp was liberated at a different time in that last year, and for some of them, it took weeks before there was liberation that took place. And even then, over in Japan, with the different camps that they had, there was. I don't know if any of you got to see the film that recently came out. I can't remember what it's called now. The Japanese camp, the guy who then became a believer at a Billy Graham crusade. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Don't remember the name. Okay, I don't remember the name either. But anyway, in there it showed very, very quickly how when the Japanese were defeated, the planes came in and dropped supplies, but it still took a long time before physically there was someone there, right? So there's human processes involved, and these extra 45 days make sense that this is to establish issues that are related to the start of the millennial kingdom. Think of it this way: the entire planet, every ruler that has been in place up until this point is going to be replaced. Every evil ruler is going to be replaced with the saints. So there's a process that takes place there, and there's also the determining of who is allowed to remain in the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. So paragraph D, there is a waiting that is taking place, possibly for God to rescue them in the midst of the chaos of those days. I mean, imagine that war has ravished, and not only war, but then the judgments of God have completely destroyed infrastructure, completely destroyed. I mean, in one of those judgments that we looked at, the mountains disappeared, right? I mean, that's severe. So there's massive chaos taking place. This will be a very important promise to many in that day. It will encourage people living on earth at that time to be faithful to the Lord in the midst of the post-war chaos and danger in the nations at that time. In post-war concentration camps, there was a lot of waiting and a lot of confusion. And then paragraph E, a total of 75 days after Jesus returns will be used for the judgment of the nations to determine who enters the millennial kingdom. Here's what it says in Ezekiel chapter 20. As I live, says the Lord God, surely with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with fury poured out, I will rule over you. I will bring you out from the peoples and gather you out of the countries where you are scattered, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with fury poured out. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will plead my case with you face to face, just as I pleaded my case with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Egypt. So I will plead my case with you, says the Lord God. I will make you pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. So just let me pause there for a minute. The picture that we're receiving here is Jesus as he is coming up through the land. He's setting the captives free, and he is essentially introducing himself in person. He's saying, I am your Messiah. And he's speaking to the Jews who have been in captivity. They've experienced a tremendous protection of God. We'll look at that again, but throughout the whole 1,260 days, we are told in Revelation chapter 12 that they are protected from the attacks of Antichrist. They are taken into the wilderness, and they are protected there, and they are provided for. So they've experienced these things, but now Jesus is literally introducing himself and saying, I am Jesus, the Messiah. I am the one who has come to set you free. And he says, I will make you pass under the rod. The rod is discipline. I will discipline you, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. That is salvation. He is extending salvation through him because of the work of the cross. He's introducing him to these Jews that have been resistant up to this point. He says, I will purge the rebels from among you and those who transgress against me. I will bring them out of the country where they dwell, but they shall not enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord. And then another passage that deals with this is in Isaiah chapter 4. It says, and it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, everyone who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem. When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. So there is a tremendous judgment that is taking place on Antichrist, but there's also a disciplining, the rod of correction that is taking place on the people of Israel. And those who will be alive in the city of Jerusalem at the time when Jesus comes in, those that are Jews, they will be saved. They will invite Jesus to come in and to be their king. Remember the passage in the Gospels where Jesus is speaking to the Jewish rulers, and he says, blessed is you will not see me again until you say, he's speaking to the Jewish rulers, until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And the Jews will accept Jesus as their king and will allow him to reign and rule over them for eternity. Next passage is from Malachi chapter 3. It says, behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord, whom you seek, will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like launderer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer to the Lord an offering in righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasant to the Lord, as in the days of old, as in former years. And I will come near you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against sorcerers, against adulterers, against perjurers, against those who exploit wage earners and widows and orphans, and against those who turn away an alien. Because they do not fear me, says the Lord of hosts. For I am the Lord, I do not change. Therefore you are not consumed, O sons of Jacob. An amazing passage in Malachi. There's some things that we have seen when it says, behold, I send my messenger. We know that John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah, but I believe there is another outpouring of the spirit of Elijah to come on the church. The witnesses in the book of Revelation, the two witnesses, they are prophesying in the spirit of Elijah. We don't know who those two are going to be. A lot of people think one of them will be Elijah. But this particular passage here does not only refer to John the Baptist, because it talks specifically about the judgment that comes when Jesus comes again. So I hope you saw that in there. We need to understand that the unity that the Lord desires in his church is for us to announce his coming. We are the way preparers for him in context of this, the end times. So that is the calling on the church. Okay, paragraph F, Jesus spoke of the Gentiles being judged according to their treatment of the Jewish people, referred to as these brothers of mine in Matthew 25, verse 40. These new Gentile believers will be told, come you who are blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom. So there is a rewarding of those who are protecting the Jewish people. So Matthew 25, verse 40 says, and the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. We like to separate out verses out of the context of where Jesus is teaching. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to use these scripture passages in different contexts, but you need to understand what Jesus is teaching. Matthew 24, none of us have a problem seeing that he is talking about the signs of the times, and he's leading an outline of what's going to be taking place. Well, Matthew 25 is a continuation of that. When he's telling the parables, he is still in context of end times. He's still talking about the same subject matter. So just keep that in mind when you read these passages. Broaden your understanding. Rather than looking at them as singled out verses. They're in a larger context of what the Lord is doing. Okay, so that completes Handout 13. Hang on to that one. We will probably refer back to it at different times throughout this study. But briefly, I want to take you over to the Daniel 70-week study, which has a kind of a picture outline of the 70 weeks prophesied in Daniel. You should have, in one of our first studies, if you've been keeping those papers, you should have an outline that shows the book of Revelation and kind of the end time events. I want you to cross-reference that outline from Revelation with what I'm giving you here in the Daniel 70 weeks. You'll see they match up perfectly. But this particularly highlights also the additional 30 days, that 43rd month in Daniel 12, verse 11. And so you can take a look at that and study up on it. In the back side of that, there's a few questions that I wanted to go through, because some people still struggle with some of the things that we've been talking about. One of the most common questions that is asked is, how can we know that these things are going to happen and when they're going to happen, when Jesus said that no one knows the day or the hour? And so that's your first question on here. Here's what I want to read this for you and see if it makes sense to you. Jesus did not say we could not know the season or the conditions surrounding his coming. In fact, what did he tell us to do? To watch and pray, right? So we're supposed to pay attention, we're supposed to understand what's going on, and we're supposed to partner with his heart. Neither did Jesus say that the church would not know the day and the hour in the generation the Lord returns. Right? He was not speaking to the church, telling them they wouldn't know in the generation when the Lord returns. We must seek the Father's word as to when this begins, because only the Father knows. But as I've been saying to you, in Daniel, in Revelation, it tells you it's 7 years. It tells you to the day it's 1,260 days. Right? And then it says 1,290 days. So that we're meant to, these are literal days, is why it uses it in different terminology. And we're meant to understand, once these events start, we can count it to the day. So have a right understanding of what Jesus is talking about when he says no one knows the day or the hour. At this point, we do not. But I believe the church in unity will be able to say with assurance, this is when it's going to happen. And we'll be proclaiming that boldly, because we'll see, okay, abomination of desolation has been set up. Mark the calendar. 1,260 days, that's when Jesus is coming again. Woo-hoo. So, God did not want to make the day and hour known in the early church, but Daniel and the Apostle John made it clear that the Messiah would come exactly 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation. So, and you can look through some of those other questions. Another one I wanted to highlight is question number 6. How do we know that the second coming procession will take 30 days? You know, that's kind of been a new concept for most people, is the idea of this second coming being a procession, because Jesus is coming as a man, a human king. He's fully God, but he's also fully man. So there is a process that takes place and a procession that takes place. The tribulation will be 3.5 years, which is 1,260 days, according to the Jewish calendar, or 42 months. Daniel 12:11 tells us, however, that though the tribulation lasts 1,260 days, the abomination of desolation is set up for 1,290 days. So we know there's still 30 days after the saints have been caught up. In other words, the tribulation of the saints lasts 30 days less than the time the Antichrist is on the earth. The question then is, why the extra 30 days? And according to 1 Corinthians 15:52, it tells us Jesus will come at the last trumpet, which I believe is the 7th trumpet. In fact, we just celebrated Thanksgiving, right? And if you were here for our Thanksgiving service, what Jewish feast did I talk about? Anybody remember? Feast of Tabernacles, right? Anybody know what the feast is before the Feast of Tabernacles? The Day of Atonement and the Trumpets, Feast of Trumpets. Feast of Trumpets comes first. That's the first fall festival, first fall Jewish festival. And then there's the Day of Atonement, and then there's the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, if you think of this prophetically, what is happening, the season that is in, these three in conjunction, you have the Feast of Trumpets, which parallel the trumpets in the book of Revelation. The Day of Atonement, there is a last blowing of the trumpet. The Day of Atonement is the day where Jesus where his sacrifice is applied to the Jewish nation. Right? So you think of that in context of prophecy and end times, with that catching up of the saints, catching up of the church. The only way that we are able to be in the presence of God is because of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus. And then the Feast of Tabernacles that ingathering, the harvest, is what's taking place there. So it's very significant, these Jewish feasts. We shouldn't forget about them. In fact, in Scripture it tells us they are perpetual for all generations, so we should pay attention to them. Okay, so there's other questions that you can take a look at. You can read those. I just wanted to highlight those two because those are kind of the two main, I guess, controversial points of the way I'm teaching this study to you, and I wanted you to have some additional understanding of that. So we're going to take a look at Handout 12. I don't know if we'll actually get into it because I want to remind you of the chronology of the book of Revelation. If you have that little card that I handed out at the beginning of our study, you can reference it, but I just want to quickly remind you of the different sections in the book of Revelation because we've had kind of a long pause in the flow of things because of looking specifically at the second coming. So there's 5 chronological sections and there's 5 angelic explanations. And if you're looking for the handout on this, it's one of the previous sessions. I don't remember which number it is. Maybe somebody can look that up and let me know so I can pass that on to people. But there's 5 chronological sections that tell us what happens to the Antichrist and his kingdom. And then there's 5 angelic explanations that tell us what happens to the believers. Remember, the events are so dramatic that John is kind of overwhelmed in the telling of the angel telling him what's taking place. And so the angel puts the storyline on hold to explain what happens to the saints in all of this. So real quickly, the first chronological section starts with Revelation chapter 6, which is where the 7 seal judgments are in view. After which comes the first angelic explanation, which answers a question that is in the heart as you read through these seal judgments. The question is, what happens to the saints? And the angel explains in that first section, the saints will be protected physically and spiritually from compromising in sin and from compromising under persecution. There will be persecution, there will be martyrs, but there is a sealing, a protecting on the believers from compromising under that. Then the second chronological section is the 7 trumpet judgments, which are worse than the seals. There's a lot of demonic activity taking place. And then after that comes the second angelic explanation, which is where we have been hanging out in the second coming procession. So the question that's answered there is, what about us getting confused and deceived by everything, all this demonic activity? And the angel gives insight to John that there is a release of a prophetic anointing and there's divine direction that is taking place parallel to these trumpet judgments. And then the third chronological section is the second coming procession, the rapture of the saints, the overthrow of all evil governments. And the third angelic explanation is answering the question, isn't this extreme? Why does it have to be so severe, the judgments? But the principle that I've mentioned numerous times is God is using the least severe means to reach the greatest number of people at the deepest level of love without violating anyone's free will. Then comes the fourth chronological section, which is the bowl judgments. This is where the Lord is dashing the nations with the rod of iron. You have that in Psalm chapter 2, and then also throughout Revelation in different sections. After which comes the fourth angelic explanation, where the question is asked, why is the infrastructure destroyed? And the answer is simple. It's because every aspect of society has been touched by wickedness. And so it has to be, the seduction of darkness has to be removed. And then the fifth chronological section is Jesus' triumphal entry, which is paralleled in Isaiah 63 and Habakkuk 3. Where it teaches that Jesus is coming up from Eden and killing the enemy that's present-day Jordan. And then the fifth angelic explanation is what happens as a result of all of this, and shows us how resurrected people are in leadership, and Jesus is going to govern for 1,000 years, preparing this planet for the Father. So, okay, handout 12 is where we are going to continue for a few more moments. We took a look already at the first Roman numeral 1, paragraph A, and we looked at paragraph so we looked at A, and we went down and ended with the saints who are alive at the time of Jesus' coming will be raptured, and that's kind of where we then took a break and looked at specifically the rapture. So this is where we're going to pick up Roman numeral chapter 2. So the third angelic explanation, this is a parenthesis, you can think of it that way. This is chapters 12 through 14 in Revelation. There is a war that is described here. A very, very severe war. In fact, we're going to read some of this portion in chapter 12. I need a bigger pulpit. I've got too many papers. Okay, so chapter 12, Revelation. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So we'll keep reading the rest of that next time. But an amazing outline that the angel is giving here. First off, a question. Who is the woman?
Church. Mary.
All right. I'm glad you asked the question of who the woman is. Genesis chapter 37 has a young man by the name of Joseph. What dream does he have?
He's supposed to marry her.
There would be 12 stars. The sun and the moon would bow down to him, and the other 11 stars would bow to him.
Sun, moon, and 11 stars. What does it say here? Sun, moon, and 12 stars. Right? So who is being talked about here? Israel. Right? Israel is the agent that God used to bring forth the Messiah. They are the covenant people. It's significant that it says a great sign appeared in heaven. We're meant to understand this is a prophetic sign that is taking place. So Israel is in view here. We know that she, being with child, cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. Now, the labor and the pain in the history of Israel has been very severe. If you think about all of the trials, all of the issues that they went through, a lot of them because of disobedience and rebellion. So their history was filled with pain and anguish. And they brought forth the Messiah. So being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. This is speaking of Satan, great fiery dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. This dragon, we are explained later on that this is Satan, who is in view here. He, from the beginning, his desire has been to destroy the nation of Israel, and in specific, to destroy the Messiah. In Genesis chapter 3, after Adam and Eve, or when Adam and Eve sinned against God, and sin was infused into humanity, God brought a judgment that at some point in the history of mankind, there would be a person who would come to crush the head of the serpent. Satan, from that prophecy onward, has tried to destroy the nation of Israel so that that prophecy would not be able to be fulfilled. Satan obviously wasn't able to stop the plan of God. The interesting thing is, he continues in the book of Revelation, in the storyline as it goes, we see him constantly trying to destroy the nation of Israel and the people of God, the church. So, he hasn't learned his lesson, and he never will, because he continues on to the end, fighting against the obvious. We're told that his tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven. Most theologians agree that this is 1/3 of the angels that came under his leadership. And when it talks here initially about the throwing to the earth, there are some people that believe that this all took place already. And that it happened when Jesus went to the cross, that Satan was kicked out of heaven. I do not believe that that is a correct view of Scripture for a number of reasons. I believe that is still a future event, that Satan will be kicked out of heaven, but that it hasn't happened yet. Here's why I believe that. In Ephesians chapter 6, we are told that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but we wrestle against powers and principalities where? In the heavenly places. Right? So Satan today still has access to the throne of God. He is called, as we even read in this passage, the accuser of who? The brethren, us, the accuser. And he has, it says here in this passage, it said night and day, what he's doing is accusing the brethren before the throne room of God. And this passage teaches us that there's coming a point where he will be kicked out. There's going to be a war that takes place where Michael, the archangel Michael, and the angels of the Lord, they will fight a spiritual battle, whatever that looks like, and Satan and his angels, his demons, will be kicked out at that point and be thrown to the earth, and they will not have access to the heavenly realm anymore. And it tells us in this passage that a woe is declared to mankind. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because Satan has come down, and he has great wrath, we're told, because he knows his time is short. It's amazing to me that he knows what his end is. He knows he's going to be going to prison. He knows he will end up in the lake of fire. He understands the scriptures better than we do. But he still has rage and tries to stop the plan of God, which is a futile attempt. But imagine what humanity will be experiencing in that day when Satan and all of his demonic angels are released onto the earth, put in prison on earth. I mean, I don't know if you've ever, I know we have a prison guard in our midst. I don't know if you've ever seen a prison in some third world countries. Maybe you've heard reports or whatever, but Julie's dad, he gets to minister to, down in Peru, I think it is, to a prison down there. And the way it works down there is there's the prison walls and the guards outside, but they don't care a thing of what's happening inside. There's no guards inside. They're left to themselves, and it's complete chaos and mayhem. So imagine the planet Earth becomes the prison of all these demons and Satan. And we're told later on that Satan, because he recognizes that his influence is no longer the same, he has tremendous influence right now because of his access in the heavenlies, because of the ability to interact in the heavenly realm. But he recognizes that he does not have that access anymore, and he gives his power and authority to the Antichrist. That's what it tells us here in the latter part of chapter 12, so we'll take a look at that. There's just too much to cover. I don't even know where to stop. So Revelation 12, we look at kind of a broad overview. I would describe it as there's war in the heavens between Satan and Michael, the archangel. In Revelation 13, we're looking at war on the earth between the Antichrist and the saints. And then Revelation 14 describes there's 7 visions that we are given that give insight into the different ways in which the Lord will intervene to empower the church to walk in great victory. That's a great promise in Scripture, that the church will be victorious, where we don't succumb to the wiles of the devil. We don't walk around in defeat in context of the end times. We actually are an emboldened church, one that is empowered by the Spirit of God to do, as it says in Daniel, it says to do great exploits. I don't know if you've ever thought of the church in terms, in this military type terms, doing great exploits. When it talks about this, what it's talking about is the power of the Spirit that will be on the church to be able to pull people out of darkness. Doing great exploits, pulling them right out of darkness. I mean, we have, in our little context here in Rushville, we can see darkness with all the pain and suffering that's going on, all the drugs and the abuse and the cutting and everything else that's happening in our community. We will have power from the Spirit to do great exploits and yank them out of that darkness. I can't wait for that to become a reality. And it's the context of that, how that happens, is in the place of prayer. And that's why that's really where we need to focus our efforts, is in being intercessors. Imagine what it would be like. Jesus, his role as high priest, right? He is the eternal intercessor. We know right now, day and night, you and I are being accused by Satan. Day and night. He's standing before God the Father, accusing us of wrongdoing. Are we guilty? Yes. Are we covered? Yes. But imagine what it would be like if Jesus was not interceding on our behalf. He's our example. He's how we should function. So if he is day and night interceding before the Father on our behalf, how much more should we grab a hold of intercessory prayer in the church?